Greetings and salutations, folks. I hope everyone is doing well and welcome to today's upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? This is an absolutely just tragic and full of paranormal, high strangeness, whatever you want to call it. But it is definitely a very tragic and just violent, terrifying experience one family had to face. Let's get into it. This experience happened in Florida, and the gentleman that I spoke with, he is Russian American. His dad moved to America from Russia like 50-something years ago, and the gentleman Gregor was born in America. His dad, Russian, his mom is American, and he grew up in Florida. Being that his dad had moved from Russia to America at a younger age, he was in his early 20s. He worked hard. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to even keep a roof on him, his wife, and their kids' heads. They had found a small trailer park in Florida, and rural Florida, not any kind of beach nearby, not East Coast, West Coast, or wherever. This is just the sticks, Florida guy. So Gregor, his father, Gregor Sr., had found this trailer park, and it was a small one. It's not very big. There's maybe 20 trailers in this park, and at one time there was like 20, and as of now there's maybe 5, or there's still trailers in the park, but maybe 5 families live in them. During the time of his experiences, Gregor's dad had actually moved his parents from Russia, and they had also bought in a trailer, and they kind of moved it right next to Gregor's dad's trailer. And very interestingly, he was kind of a carpenter, a man of many trades. You know, he and his mom, or Gregor's mom and his dad, like I said, worked many jobs. Gregor's dad, Gregor, He worked sometimes 3 jobs just to keep, the lights on, to keep food in the house. And they combined their trailers. They had actually, like, I don't know how, but really almost connected them and then added another trailer to it. And he said growing up, we had our own rooms. We had, even though it was in a trailer park, and we were poor, it wasn't bad. I had my own bedroom, and my bedroom was bigger than some of my friends that lived in, $300,000-$400,000 houses back then. It was a nice, comfortable living arrangement that they had. And he, proceeded to grow up. The area around this trailer park was, there's a national park around the area, and it is very woodsy. It's not your typical Florida. I've only been to Florida. I lived in Florida for a little bit, and I lived in Flagler. And I can honestly say that when I lived there were a lot of rural spots. So I'm just imagining where he lived and what it was like. Because where I lived, we had houses. We had a neighbor next to us, and I had wild boar running through my backyard. So, and I was like a half an hour in between Jacksonville and Orlando. So, he was closer to Georgia, Mississippi, that side of Florida. Very comfortable life, but poor. And his grandmother was, from the old country, very superstitious, and used to talk a lot about kind of odd feelings that she would have. I guess when they moved here, and Gregor Sr. had bought in this second trailer, joined them together, and proceeded to, do more work on them. The mom, his grandmother, would talk about spirits, talk about entities. Gregor Jr. knew Russian, spoke Russian fluently. And so he was picking up on little things. One evening, his grandmother had kept talking about how she was seeing something out in the back part of their land. And they had a pretty big size lot. And where their lot ended, there was just, it almost butted up to an empty kind of set of woods. And then, a mile or two is where this national park would have started. It wasn't like our trailer park butted right up to the national park. No, there was a set of woods and then the national park. So I guess it almost did essentially butt up, but not really. The grandmother had talked about seeing this, what she thought was this spirit, this entity. And she had been really upset. Gregor's mom, who is American and from Florida, initially and originally, had sat down with her, and he remembers this vividly. He said, my grandmother was so upset, and she was talking about this demon creature, this demon spirit, but it was a creature. And this is where it gets a little strange, because she would, in the Russian language, it was interpreted as a spirit, right? But it was a physical entity. And that was what was confusing him as a child. His dad understood. He at that point had not seen anything. She just kept seeing this entity in the back. And finally, she had one night gone outside. She was taking something out to the garbage, and she had screamed. She let out this loud scream. Gregor was probably 10, and everyone kind of ran out. Gregor's mom, his brother, and his sister. The granddad was not feeling good. The father was working. So the kids and the mom ran out and found the grandmother lying in the backyard area. And I guess she would have taken out the garbage, put it in the bin where Gregor's dad would pick it up, bring it to the dump or the transfer station. And she had passed right there. Now, they immediately called 911. Law enforcement and the ambulance came. Law enforcement came he thinks it was because of where it was, being in a very small community. And the community was already known for drug addiction and the hillbilly heroin epidemic. This was during that. So instantly, law enforcement comes. They realize that she's way old, and they take her body away. EMS ends up leaving. The coroner comes in, and he remembers this because he was confused of why his grandmother didn't get put in an ambulance. And he actually thought that because he was of Russian descent and his grandmother was from Russia, that they were Americans, or the EMS and police officers were being mean to his family. Now obviously he knows that the coroner comes in and does that. So as they're waiting, the police are waiting for the coroner. They're getting information from Gregor's mom, and Gregor's kind of sitting off to the side on this deck that his dad had built, that connected. It was weird because he's like, my grandparents' trailer kind of nudged out past ours, and then ours had an L connection to it. So it was 3 trailers that were joined together, with walls that were not existent at one time on the outside. It was very interesting to hear how his dad did this. His dad literally was a jack of all trades. He washed dishes. He had cleaned buildings. He did a little bit of carpentry, as to make money for the family. So he said, I was sitting on the deck and I could see where my grandma was, and I saw where, I was looking at the police officers, and, they're waiting for the coroner to show up to get my grandmother. They had, actually, he at that point, being that he was so young, thought how they were being judgmental about his Russian side. But he realized now that even after the EMS left, he still thought, but he realizes, he said it was, I didn't realize this until later on, that, they had left my grandmother lying on the ground. He said, but one of the police officers that actually walked to his car and got an emergency blanket and laid it down on the ground and had the other police officer help him and put the body on the emergency blanket, so it wouldn't be on the ground, which you don't do, because, especially if the coroner's coming in and you got to look around, maybe an investigation, whatnot. So he's watching all this. He's very observant. And he looks out to the woods in this fielded area, and there's an old fence that separates the trailer park and the land that would separate the trailer park from the national park. And it's kind of a field that somebody obviously owned. He doesn't know who did at the time, but it was always overgrown. There was always kind of debris in there from well before he was there, people weren't dumping shit back there. It was just like there's probably an old farm out there at one time, and so there isn't like an old trough or something out there and just random shit. But he's looking out at the field, and because for some reason he had remembered about his grandmother talking about this entity or this demonic spirit or whatever. And he sees these sets of eyes off to the corner of the land. And he said it was weird. He said, I look and I see these just really strange colored eyes. He said they were these like golden kind of orange color, like almost like a marigold, but bright. They were very bright. And he said, I was watching them and I could see them watching the situation. And every once in a while I lose track of them because of the police lights. He said, but I did see them blink a couple of times. He said, and then I saw it move over to another area, and it was almost like it was getting a better look at what was going on. He said, and then when it moved, it stood up. It gained height. And he looked at his mother and he said, something in Russian to get her attention. Because he was afraid of the police. He even though he saw that they had put his grandmother on this blanket and were not being disrespectful at all. Being an immigrant, or first generation American, he was afraid of the police. Listening to stories of his dad growing up in Russia and things like that. So he was very untrusting. And he said something to his mom. His mom came over thinking that he needed a hug. And he said, when his mom put her arms around him, he said, I pinched her because I wanted to get her attention. He said, I'll never forget pinching her because she said, ow. And he said, like, Mama, behind you, by the fence. And he said it in a low voice. And she said, what is? And he said, I remember seeing Grandma. He said, Grandma. And she said, I know, Grandma's behind me, dead on the ground. Not in those terms. Yes, Grandma is behind me. And he says, by the fence. And she turns and she looks. And the police are talking amongst themselves now. And she sees these eyes. And she turns really quick and looks down at Gregor. And she goes, what do you mean, Grandma? And he said, I think that's what Grandma was seeing. I think that's that thing that Grandma has been seeing. And she turns and looks again. And he thinks at one point his mom contemplated on telling the police or having them go check it out. He obviously doesn't know. He's just making the assumption. He goes, because my mom, after she turned back around and looked at me, she turns back and walked toward the police. And instantly I thought that she was going to tell them, and I said something to her to kind of stop her from telling them. But she had continued the conversation that they were having. So, long story short, the coroner comes, picks her body up. By then, Gregor Sr. has come home, and obviously before cell phones, so the mom had to get in touch with his work and then get him. He comes home and he starts asking questions in Russian. The mom is translating his Russian. He speaks English, or he spoke decent English, but not super good. Interestingly enough, I did not realize that there is a large Russian population in Florida. And he said, why wouldn't you think that? And I was like, oh, it's Florida, you hear Florida man. And he laughed and he said, only a Russian would be, and he's got kind of an accent, but not really. He's got this weird kind of accent. He's like, only a Russian could be Florida man. He's like St. Augustine. And I was like, oh, shit. I didn't put two and two together until so I had a completely dumb moment right there. But his dad is asking questions, and he remembers his dad coming over to him and rubbing his head. And he said something along the lines of, I guess Grandma won't be seeing that, and there was a name for it that they had, and he doesn't remember the name. It was this old kind of Russian terminology for this entity. And he thought that was weird. He was just like, huh? Like, your mom just died. Even to this day, he thinks it's weird, like it's a strange thing to say. So long story short, again, Grandma gets picked up and they have the funeral, and life goes on. Now, during this time, the grandfather is getting sicker, getting older. Not really anything to live for. The love of his life is gone. He's in a country that, he doesn't know. It must have been very hard for him. And Gregor said that. He goes, my grandfather was lost. He's in a country that he didn't know, a country that he's never been to. He left a country that he's known for his entire life. He's never been outside of Russia and then my grandmother, the love of his life, passes away. So he's just, he was unshaven, and this is a guy who wore a tie. He wore a white shirt, a tie, and slacks, and he'd roll his sleeves up, doing nothing. It was just his wardrobe. That was what he wore. And eventually he would just, it was shorts and, a wife beater or a muscle shirt, whatever they're called, tank top. So his grandfather's just kind of going down, and one night he's with his grandfather, and his grandfather and him are talking. They're playing chess, actually, and talking about the old days, the old country, and this and that. And Gregor brings up the name of this entity, and I can't say the name. I'm not even going to attempt to say it. I butcher things terribly when I cannot pronounce something, so I'm not even going to attempt to say it. It just translates to a demon. And he said what his dad had said to him, to his grandfather. but not like, hey, Dad said this to me. He didn't say it like that. He just said, as they're playing chess randomly, I guess Grandma's not going to see the monster anymore. Something along those lines. Like, and which, thinking back now, he's like, what a dickish move. But my grandfather just instantly lashed out and smacked me in my face, like hard. And he's like, and my grandfather was a big guy. He wasn't very tall. He was like 5'9". But he said my grandfather's arms were just gigantic. His shoulders were wide. He was just a big, stocky guy. And when he hit me, I instantly started to cry, and I ran out of his side of the house. And, I went and told my mom. I had this bruise on my face. My mom went in and started yelling at him. His mom, being English born, generational American, English born, speaking English all her life, being generational American, but her family is also Russian. She can speak Russian pretty fluently. She's yelling at him, not as good as her husband would speak. The husband, Gregor's dad, is sleeping. He hears everything, and Gregor says, I remember thinking how crazy this was, because my dad, he said, I never saw my dad without clothes on. He always wore his slacks, and he always wore a nice shirt. He didn't wear a tie like my grandfather, but he always wore a nice shirt, like a polo or a button up. Even if he was changing the oil in a car, he always just dressed presentably. He said my dad comes running out of his room because he could hear my mom yelling at my grandfather in Russian, and he could hear some of the things that he had, how he had hit me. And my dad came running out in his underwear. He said, I've never seen my father in his underwear. Never before or after that did I. But my father came, and he was pissed. He started yelling at my grandfather about touching me and putting his hands on me. And then during this loud kind of yelling, he said, there's a scream from the other side of the house. And even though it's 3 trailers connected, it's pretty much a house, it's huge. And on the one trailer that ran off to the side of the 2, so his grandparents, their trailer, and then another trailer ran that way, was like a living room area. Even though they were not, his dad worked very hard. They had a pinball machine, kind of a pool table, but it wasn't a pool table. It was, but it was a bumper pool table. Never heard of one. Never heard of a bumper pool table until talking with him, and had to look it up. But, that was the kids' area, the relaxed area where they did their Christmas stuff. And so his sister screams from there. And all of the yelling stops. Like, she just lets out this, like, almost like she had cut herself. And everybody just ran. His dad, his mom, his grandfather. And he said, I remember running out that way, and my grandfather, he looked at me, and he goes, come on, boy. And he pushed me ahead. Like, all was forgiven. Like, nothing, like he just got screamed at. But because there was this emergency, my grandfather was just, go. So as they run to the end of their house, and you have to think about, it's going to look like an L. He said the back part of the trailer was where there was a TV room where we did like our Christmases there. We had our TV there. Before that was like the game rooms where the pool table and the pinballs and stuff were. And that's where my sister was. She was watching TV. And there was beanbags chairs in there. And she would lay on the beanbags after school and just watch TV after she was done playing or her homework and stuff. And there was, of course, windows. There was 3 windows in that room. One on one side of the wall, one on the other, and one on the back side. And as they walk into this room, she's like pushed up against the wall where the door is and screaming as loud as she can. And he hears his father yell something, and he picks up, he doesn't remember what it was. He picks up something and he throws it. But there's congestion of people right in the doorway. So he kind of maneuvers to get to his sister. And as he gets to his sister, he looks, and what his father is yelling at and throwing is this huge head. And it is exactly the head of a dog, like a German Shepherd. It looked identical to a German Shepherd, except its eyes were this golden yellow color, this just, orangish golden marigold color. And its teeth, it's like growling at them. And it is huge. And it was trying to get in. You could see where it had smashed the window. And the yelling was so loud that they didn't hear the window break. So when it smashed the window to get to his sister, it was trying to come through the windowsill. So there was claw marks in the window, in the inner part of the wall where it had actually put its shoulders were kind of stuck, so it couldn't have gotten in, but it was trying. He remembers his grandfather grabbing one of the pool sticks. And I have never heard of bumper pool. I don't know what it is. I looked it up. The pool sticks look different. The table is different. I guess it's smaller, and there's these kind of blockers in the table where you have to bounce it off of these kind of like odd. It's a game of strategy, I guess. But he had grabbed one of the pool cues, and he had snapped it over his knee, and he had the fat end of the pool cue, and he just ran over and he started to smash it in the head, yelling in Russian. And once again, he said, and it must have hurt this thing because, it had its shoulder kind of stuck in, like it was trying to get in, and then it wedged itself out, and my grandfather is just smashing it. And his being his grandfather was that old world, just stocky man, like just big, He said, I guarantee that this thing was hurt, he was clubbing it in the head, on the snout, and you could hear the thwacks, and they sounded sickening. He said, I remember what they sounded like to this day. And it had, pulled its head out. His grandfather, as it pulled its head out, his grandfather turned back and started to run back out through the congestion of people. His dad is checking on his daughter, in his underwears. His mom is, and then he realizes that his dad, Gregor Sr., realizes that his dad, Gregor's grandfather, is going outside, and he proceeds to run, and he grabs a pool cue. And he's holding it. He said, I saw my dad hold it like a spear. He said, Jeff, it was the weirdest thing. He said, Imagine being a kid, never seeing your father in nothing but his clothes all your life. I've never seen my dad's legs, I don't think. He never swam a day in his life. He said, and there's my dad running after my granddad, going outside to find this creature in tighty whities in a tank top, holding a pool cue like a spear. He said it was probably the funniest thing, and he starts laughing about it now. He said, but one of the scariest things I had seen, because this was so unnormal for me, and he said, I don't know who it would be normal for. He said, so I ran after my dad and my granddad. My mom, my little brother, and my sister were all in the room still. My mom's consoling my little sister. He said, my brother is clueless to what is going on because he was in a different part of the house. He was probably in his room doing something else. So I ran out after, and I see my dad run off the deck. My grandfather's already running around the trailer, going to confront this Dogman, which they are referring to as this Russian demon name. He said, I'd get around the corner, and where my grandfather and dad were, he said, I watched my dad run around the house. He said, me being a kid, I'm slower than both of them, but I get there, and my grandfather is standing kind of closer to the woods, holding the back end of that pool cue. There's my dad looking around and looking at the window. I come around the corner, and I scared my dad and my granddad, and they both kind of look at me and yell. And he said when they yelled at me, I started to cry because I was upset on top of whatever, all of this just happened. My granddad had just slapped me. All this just happened, and then I just got yelled at. He said that my dad came over immediately and grabbed me. My granddad came over and grabbed me as well, and they gave me a hug. And then my grandfather proceeded to walk back out to where he had just been. He had rubbed his head and, said something very loving in Russian to him. He had walked out back to where he was, and he was looking. And he's looking at the ground. He had bent down and started to look at the ground, and it was dark because the lights on that back side of the house, or the lights in the front part of the house on the side here, didn't illuminate too much in the back, but you could see enough. And he was obviously looking for some sort of footprints. And he remembers his granddad walking to the window and looking at it, and his dad said something to his granddad. They all went into the house. He said my dad disappeared for 2 or 3 minutes and came back out with a shirt and his pants on, and my granddad and dad were busy for the rest of for a little bit until it was time for me to go to bed. They were putting some sheetrock covering the window, so there wasn't a hole there. My dad was just quickly putting this, making it a permanent wall at that point. And he said my sister and my baby brother ended up sleeping with my parents that night, and I slept in my room alone. He said I was scared. He said I remember being scared because I kept thinking about my grandmother and the terminology. It was a Slovakian, Slavic demonic creature. And he keeps thinking about this name over and over in his head. And he said finally I fell asleep, and I wake up the next morning and I have breakfast. My sister is now still in my parents' room. My dad is outside with my granddad, and they're looking at the back end of the trailer where the window was. And you could clearly see, like, when it smashed the glass, like glass had went inside and outside, but it was trying to get in because you could see where its feet had been on the ground. There was like claw marks in the dirt, and there were marks on the side of the trailer in the vinyl siding where it was trying to climb up into the trailer, and it had, ripped some of the vinyl siding. He said, so Dad and Granddad spent the next 2 days. They took the window frame out and made it a completely permanent wall. My dad had then started to put these bars on the window. He had bought some rebar, and for like when you put cement, that kind of, it's about, I don't know, a little thicker than a pencil, a lot thicker than a pencil, maybe a little thicker than a Sharpie. And he had made his own kind of bars for the windows that faced any part of the woods that were not where the light could hit them. So like on his bedroom, there was some, on the kids' rooms, there were these, so nothing could get in. Anywhere the kids would have been in the family room or family part of the trailer, where, that essentially that one trailer that they had added as an addition had become essentially the family room. So kids play there. There's bars on those windows. He remembers that and it taking some time. And then for some reason, everything had kind of gotten back to normal. Life had slowed down. Funeral for his grandma, and his grandfather started to look a little better. Like he had said, his granddad kind of let himself go, he was always clean shaven and always dressed with a white shirt and a tie and either gray, blue, or black slacks. And now he's shaving and he's just back to normal. And things started to just kind of even out. And about 2 years later, he's now going into 7th grade. He remembers that he had to get the bus by himself. And he wanted to do that because now he had all that is out of his mind at this point. And he's, older. His mom still accompanies his siblings to their bus stop, and he wanted to go to his bus stop alone, which was just down the road, out the trailer park and down the road. And there were like 1 or 2 other kids that waited with him. And one day after school, he had gotten off the bus, and none of the couple kids that usually were with him, they didn't get off the bus. They weren't on the bus. And he's walking down this road. He's turning into the trailer park area. It's all woods. There's no mountains. It's just flat, hot, and freaking buggy with a lot of woods. And he starts to proceed into the trailer park, and he hears something in the woods off to his side. A lot of crunching of deadfall, like something big was walking in those woods. And it startled him real quick, because he jumps. He said, I jumped and I looked. He said, and I'm in 7th grade, Jeff. He said, so I'm even though I was born in America, he said, my parents, my mom being American, but my dad Russian, my grandfather Russian. He said, I had a lot of, Russian kind of whatever. He said, so I was ready, he said, but I was still a kid. I was learning how to skateboard and, just learning American things. He said, so I jump back and I yell something like, come on, you asshole, or something like that. He goes, because I thought it was a pervert. He goes, because the people in those vans would take kids in Florida back then. There was a lot of abductions, he said. And he's like, come on, you asshole. And he hears a growl. And he said, at that second, everything came flooding back from that night. He said, the second I heard the growl, he said, every fear, every sight, every smell of that night came flooding back into me. And he said, and I didn't even give it time to look at me. He said, I didn't see it. He said, but when I heard it, I started running. He said, and for some reason, as I'm running, he said, I felt it like it was watching me from the woods, and I knew exactly what it was. He said, I knew 100% without a doubt it was this Dogman. He said, so I got home, I'm crying, I'm so upset. And my mom calms me down. He said, so I by now my granddad and him are very good. Granddad and him are very good. Long apology, just, and he's talking to his granddad about everything. And their thing was playing chess. Gregor loves chess to this day. He said, I love it. It's relaxing. So they're playing chess, and he opens up to his grandpa about what happened. Because his mom said not to say anything to his granddad. And being that his granddad was, even though that was that one incident, he's still very close to his granddad. He loved him to be, and as he got older, he understood why. It was an instinct, the man's heart was broken. He was in a different country and, just lost. Even though his son and his grandkids were there, he was lost. He said, so I understand, why he did it. It just hurt prior to, he said, Granddad stood up, he said, and kissed me on my forehead and said, take 2 turns, and walked out the room. And I just sat there like, what the hell? And he said, I heard my mom yelling at my granddad to be smart. Don't go outside. Just stay inside, be smart. He said, I ran out, and my mom looked at me and said, why did you say anything? This is why I didn't want you to say anything. Because now my granddad is walking out of their trailer, and he's got the shotgun, because after that incident, his dad and his granddad both bought a shotgun. He said, and granddad's holding that thing, across, and he's walking directly where I told him it happened. He said he gets to the area, and by now Gregor and his mom are on their little deck, and they're listening, and they can hear him yelling in Russian, get out here, you fuck, get out here, and whatever. A lot of vulgarities and a lot of name calling, like calling a dog man a bunch of nasty names is going to want to make it come out any faster, But he thought demon, so when you upset a demon, or when you do any kind of disrespect, they become very aggressive. So that's what his granddad is envisioning, that this thing is demonic and he's going to get it to come out and shoot it. So he's yelling, and his mom yells something to his granddad, and his granddad puts his hand up and just stands there for a second, and then turns and starts walking back to the house. As Gregor and his mom are on the deck watching Granddad come, they see the head. First, they see the head coming out of the woods, and then they see this leg come out, the shoulders, and now it's standing right on that wood line inside the trailer park, just standing there, staring dead at his granddad. He turns and just shoots it once. Boom! 12 gauge. He assumes it was a 12 gauge. Because after his granddad died, for some reason, the mom ended up getting rid of all the firearms in the house. But he takes the shot, and he assumes that it hit in its shoulder. He thought he aimed for its chest, but because of how it moved, and when it did finally, not come to, but realize, hey, I just got blasted in my shoulder by a shotgun, it instantly howled this just long howl and turned and ran back into the woods. Grandpa's standing right there, and he's just proud, turns and walks back, gets to the house, goes to the gun cabinet, puts his shotgun in there, and roughly somewhere, they hadn't seen it, it went cold again. And he was about 15 now. He had just started his first job, and it was not anything romantic or great, it was just his first job. He was working at a fast food joint. So he now is working. It's summer, school is out, and he can work X amount of hours. He's working not till close, but till about 9. He remembers it was a weird how they had him scheduled, especially in the summer, because he had X amount of hours he could work per week, and they gave him these just 3 or 4 o'clock till 9 or 8, just weird shifts like that. So in the middle of the day, no one else is coming in at 3 or 4, just him. But it was his first job, being young, so they had to compromise and work with him. He gets home, and this is years have gone by. His grandmother has, peacefully been laid to rest. His little sister has kind of almost stopped talking about the experience as much. So it's just, life is kind of smooth. He gets a ride from a coworker who had gotten out same time he did, and the coworker drops him off. Gregor tells him, just drop me off at the front here, at the entrance of the trailer park. And he says, okay, see you tomorrow, this and that. And he gets out of the car, and he's walking down through He hears a car pull out and drive away. And shortly, not even seconds, but he hears just the locking of the brakes. And he thinks immediately like his coworker. So he just starts running back toward the road to see what just happened. So he's looking out, and obviously there's lights on the side of the road so he can see. Headlights are on. And he's standing there looking. He's looking at the ass end of the car. He realizes his coworker. And he sees this kind of shadow run in front of the car and off to the other side of the road. And it's huge, just absolutely huge. His coworker, not seeing Gregor, but backs up, and I guess he was going to back up and pull into the trailer park and then go the way that he had just come, the opposite direction of where this thing was. So as he's backing in, Gregor's standing watching him, and he thinks he's coming to talk to him. And he sees, his coworker sees him and puts the window down, and he goes, "What in the hell was that?" He goes, Did you see that? He said, "What was that?" His coworker's just, because it's where Gregor lives, so he's probably under the impression that he knows what this is. And Gregor looks at him and he says, "I don't know. I have no idea what that is." He's at that age where he purposely didn't have his coworker go in because he was embarrassed. He didn't want to tell him about his past, where this creature thing broke into his house, possibly scared his grandmother to death. Just this, and that. So he's, talking to him, and he says, "I've never seen anything like that." And his coworker says, "Jesus, it looked just like one of those werewolves from, American Werewolf in London." He said, "It looked just like that goddamn thing." He said, "Wow." And he said, "I gotta go." He said, "Are you all right?" And Gregor's like, I'm good. And he pulls out, and Gregor watches him and looks down the other side of the road. And he looks off to the side where this thing had just gone. And after his car lights are gone, he's just looking. And he's starting to make his decision to turn back around and head back to his house. And he sees these, on the other side of the road is a ditch. And then past the ditch is kind of a spillway where when it rains and stuff, it'll fill up and bring the water to like one of these ponds that sit in the middle of Florida everywhere. So he sees it, and he sees the eyes, and immediately he recognizes them from day one years ago. And then there's another set, and then there's another set. He said there was about 5 sets, Jeff. He said, and I knew that if I didn't turn around right now, not to count them or not to whatever, but if I didn't turn around right now and run as fast as I could to my house, that these things would be on me like white on rice. He said, so I just turned and started running. He said, and I'm listening, my heart's in my ear. He said, I'm out of breath already because, just fear. He said, and I could hear scampering on the road out behind me. He said, I knew they were coming. He said, I just got to my door, my parents' house door. And as I'm opening the door, he said, I turned back, and he said there was one standing right where this tree is that his dad had put a tire swing for his sister and brother. And it's just standing there right next to this tree and tire swing, staring at Gregor. He said, and I ran in and I started yelling to my mom. And my mom and I are speaking in English, something that, his dad and his granddad weren't really, they were getting better, but actually his granddad was not getting better with his English. His dad was. So he tells his mom what just happened. And as he's telling his mom, his mom's like, she goes in and checks on his little sister and his brother, who are now older too as well. They're in his parents' room. Dad's sleeping to get up in a little bit for work. And he's looks around at his sister and his brother and his dad. His dad's out like a light. And he shuts the door, goes out to his mom. And right as he's saying something to his mom, the whole kind of roof just mangles in, like something just dropped on top of it. And he thinks it either jumped up and landed, but what makes more sense to him is this thing jumped out of a tree and landed. And a long time ago, I guess trailers had a vent system on the top of them if they were older and old enough. Many of you who are older will remember this. I don't remember. And I had a buddy that lived in like this 1970s trailer. The thing was so old. But there was like a window in the middle of the trailers that it was small. It was like maybe a foot by a foot box, and usually it was plastic, not glass. Was a non see-through kind of plastic. You open it and you get your so this thing is walking on their roof after it just, he assumes it jumped from the tree, and he's looking up at the roof of the trailer, and his mom's looking with him as well, and he's just following it, and he realizes that it's a crank. You crank it and it kind of opens, and he realizes that's open for air, for ventilation, and knowing that it's not going to fit, but knowing that he could get a good view of this thing, and that's all he wanted, was like an up close personal view. And he runs over and he looks up, and there it is looking down at him, and he can only see part of its head because how the vent thing, it raises up, so it blocks any kind of vision or view of it. A large chunk of view is blocked out, and it sticks its hand through the hole, trying like to get in or whatever it was doing. He said if it was trying to get in, it was obviously not thinking. He said they're supposed to be smart, but I think it was trying to scare me. He said for some reason it did, but it didn't. And he goes, and I grabbed that crank and I started cranking it shut on its arm. He said, and it let out this howl when it got to a certain point, and it stopped moving. He goes, I couldn't move it anymore, but it's ripping up, trying to get its arm out. And he says, the last pull it did, he said, I watched this creature's elbow just kind of get exposed, because when it ripped up the vent, the plastic piece that had metal edging around it, ripped its elbow area. And there's just this huge kind of flap of skin hanging off its arm. Blood's pouring out of its arm. It lets out this howl. And as it let out the howl, its arm's out, he closes the vent, because once again, it was like not very, so when he gets it closed, it's like mangled, but it's closed. If it rained, water's coming through. But he just, for some reason, closed it quick. It's not going to save anything. And as he closes it, not thinking, that howl must have caused the other ones that he had seen. You can hear them, and they all start like hitting the side of the trailer, smashing into it. And, one or two on one side, one or two on the other. And the one that's on the roof has now gotten off of the roof, because there's no more any kind of movement coming from the roof. And he's just watching everything, looking at the walls, looking at the roof. His father comes running out. His mother picks up the phone and calls the police. The father says, something about why'd you call the police? And about 20 to 30 minutes later, the police show up. By then, everything had died down. He said, I don't know why they didn't break the windows. He said, I think that when I cut its arm with that metal edging on that thing, I think I pissed it off, and when it hollowed like that, it kind of summoned the others to come help it. He said, so then it just stopped hitting the walls, everything stopped. The police come, and they come in thinking, that an intruder was trying to break in. And they're taking a statement from his mom, from his dad, from him. And one of the officers that are with him walks through and kind of is looking at their home, but notices that there's a kind of a blood stain right under that window or vent system. Once again, it's like a foot by a foot. He looks up at it, and he looks down at the blood, and he looked at Gregor, and he said, "What happened here, bud?" And Gregor said, "One of the guys tried to put his arm in there, and I didn't know what else to do, so I closed it quick." And he's looking up at it, and he goes, he must have caught his arm in there. He said, because when he pulled, you could hear like him scream, and it got rumpled a little bit like that. And he looks at Gregor, and he's looking at that, and he goes, "Listen," he goes, "how big was this guy?" He goes, "Because for a guy to do that with one arm, pulling his arm up like that," he goes, "that's almost impossible to do, bud." He goes, "How big was he?" And he's, "I don't know, big." And so they walk around the trailer area, and one of them asks Gregor's dad, he said, "Do you have a ladder?" And Gregor's dad did not have a ladder that would reach the top. He had just like like a step ladder, just a small step ladder. So the younger cop, the one that was talking to Gregor, gets up onto the deck railing and climbs up onto the roof looking with his flashlight. Gregor's watching him, and he sees the huge dent, and he looks over to the window, and he sees the window's kind of rumpled up and shit like that, and he's looking, and he sees this something, and he pulls it with his flashlight. He starts dragging whatever it is with his flashlight, and he puts his gloves on, his medical gloves on, and he yells for his partner, "Hey," he goes, "you got an evidence bag in your pocket?" And his partner says, "Yeah, for what though?" He said, "There's what looks to be flesh and hair right here. He goes, the flesh looks normal. He goes, but, the hair is coarse and black. And he puts it in the bag. And as he's putting it in the bag and getting off of the railing, they hear everyone who's outside hears this howl. And the cops are looking around. Gregor goes right back inside. He goes, I went inside. He said the cops were there. He said, they can handle it. I yelled for my mom to come in. By now my dad is outside, talking to everyone. And the police officer says, something along the lines of like coyote or something. And the other younger cop goes, I don't think that's a coyote. He goes, and I don't think there was a person on that roof. And he clicks his flashlight and he's looking around and he gets Gregor's dad. He said, look. And Gregor the next morning said, because he was looking out the window watching everything, he said the next morning these tracks were huge. He said, but they didn't look human. And they almost looked like an elongated canine foot. Ending in 3 toes on one end and kind of like a possible claw or whatever on the other end. So 3-toed, 3-clawed in the front, and multiple all around the trailer. And they leave. Next morning, he does not know what was said. Next morning, he goes out and he sees him. And he's shaking his head and he's like, I gotta move. In his head, he thinks, I gotta move. And he's like, in his head thinking, I'm gonna be 16. I'm gonna quit school. I'm gonna work at the fast food place that I'm working at. And I'm gonna get an apartment on my own and move. He goes, because I can't live here anymore. He said, I'll move my mom in with me and my brother and sister. He said, my dad and my granddad can stay back here. This is all something he's thinking at 16. 2 nights go by after the cops. And he goes into his granddad's room to his side of the house. In the living room, that's where they played their chess game. And it was always dark in there, even when they were playing chess. It was just like a dim bulb lighting this area. And he goes in and he says something to his granddad. And he shakes his granddad. And his granddad, head flops down. And he realizes that his granddad had passed away in his sleep. And things progressively start to get a little weirder from there. Because at that point, for some reason, the Dogman, or this Slavic demonic creature, whatever its name is, they no longer make an appearance at the house. They no longer are an issue. From that night, when its flesh got ripped, those things were never seen again. So from the point that his granddad died to when he ended up moving out, what started to occur was almost like a haunting. These things were literally never seen again. There was never any kind of noises again. Never any footprints after that. His dad had cleaned, he remembers his dad raking any kind of evidence of those prints from around the house. But what he remembers for the next 2 to 3 years was a lot of knocking inside the house, a lot of furniture and things being not misplaced but moved. Like something was purposely reorganizing things. Or one night they had come back from, like, his sister had some sort of play or something that she had done, and he remembers the whole family had gone and he had bought his own vehicle by now. And he said, my mom, dad, and my little brother and my sister and I were all at my sister's recital. And he said when we got home, he said I had my little sister drive with me. He said I beat my parents home. And we got home, my little brother, then my mom and dad got home. My little brother ran into the far room where my sister used to watch TV, and that was kind of her room where that Dogman tried to smash through the wall. After that period of time, no, she did not go back in. She'd usually, when she, as she's growing up, she'd watch TV in her parents' room, and then as she got older, got a TV in her room. But the little brother runs into the back room to watch TV before he's got to go to bed, and he yells, "What in the hell?" And his mom heard it, and she yells at him, something like, "Don't say those words," because he's young still. And he said, "No, Mom, come here. Come here and look at this." And Mom goes in and looks. Gregor's behind her. The dad had, was getting ready to go into work. And the pinball machine was actually on top of the pool table. And just stuff like that. Like, Gregor, in order for Gregor to do that, it'd have to be another person help him. And him and his sister got blamed for it, but it took him and his dad all they could do to get that machine off of the table. And of course, realizing how heavy it is, the dad immediately apologized. I apologize for blaming you and da-da-da. But all haunting things like that. And then there was a time when his sister was having sleep paralysis. And this scared... It was almost like these things were targeting her for some reason. But she claimed that this old woman was in her room and she couldn't breathe. And when she finally was able to breathe and look around her room, she saw this hideously deformed woman in the corner of her room, and she could see, the outline of it. And then she saw these bright white eyes. And when she saw the eyes, they were not cold. They were not, demonic looking, but they were almost angelic, I guess would be the best word. Safe is what he used. And his sister looks, and it was her grandma. It was their grandma. standing behind this whatever and put her arms around the creature, or this deformed woman thing. And as she put her arms around the creature, she waved and then just kind of disappeared with the creature and herself. So almost using her good in the afterlife to protect her granddaughter. At that point, everything kind of ended. That was real weird around the house. There was no more any kind of or sleep paralysis. There was nothing. And eventually he ends up moving out. The sister periodically would talk to him about the past and stuff. And after that, after seeing the grandmother, everything stopped. The whole kind of haunting, the cryptid experiences, everything stopped peacefully. There was nothing more. The little brother, obviously, way younger than Gregor, but he lived there for, until he graduated. So multiple years after everything, and there's never been another paranormal or cryptid experience. But it all stemmed from, and this is the strangest part, he said, my grandmother, I believe, was very powerful. With the sixth sense or whatever, because she could sense these things were out there and the family was in danger. She would just try to, keep everything calm and peaceful, even in the life, but in the afterlife, it was that one and gone, where she put her arms around that demonic, hideous, deformed creature woman, and then everything stopped. So, was the connection the grandmother? Gregor thinks so. Gregor, without a shadow of a doubt, believes that his grandmother was fully in charge of these creatures. Not like, hey, attack my family and scare them to pieces. But no, like, for some reason, maybe from the old country, she had figured out, a way of dealing with these things. Who knows? It's just baffling that he thinks that these things targeted his sister, and then, or they targeted his sister and they had targeted his grandmother. So whatever this demonic creature was after the youngest and oldest female family members. Just totally bizarre. Totally bizarre. Maybe it was from the old country. Maybe it followed her. Maybe it was attached to her. And maybe for some reason it just seeked out the youngest and oldest. And that's why the mom was not bothered. But why would it target him? He doesn't believe his little brother ever saw it up close and personal, except that one night. But he never was bothered. So that is an intense freaking... I feel bad for that whole family, because that grandma was strong, and she watched over them, the whole family, that whole time. All right, folks, there you have it. I hope you all enjoyed this upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you for supporting the channel. It is your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions. Never stop searching for the truth. God bless all of you.